This conference will now be recorded.
Okay guys, let's get started. So I'm gonna take you to the historical background of SCCM, right? So SCCM started when? In the year 1994, right? Then uh, previously we used to call this product as SMS, System Management Server, as you see, SMS, right? And then in the year 2007, they changed the name to SCCM, System Center Configuration Manager, right? And multiple versions of SCCM like 2012, 15, 11. These three versions released in the year 2016. These three versions released in the year 2017, right? Then these three versions released in the year 2018. These three versions released in the year 2019. But in the year 2019, they changed the name again to um, MECM. Previously, we used to call it as SCCM, but now it is, as you see, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. That's the new name of this product. These three versions released in the year 2020. These three versions released in the year 2021. And these versions released in the year 2022. So what is the latest and greatest version of SCCM at the moment, guys? Anyone? Hmm? Any idea?
It's November. It's November 22.
November 22, right? But what is the version number?
It's going to be 2209 or 11. Sorry,
No,
20,
2211.
2211. Yes, 2211.
This is released last year, November
Last year.
2022.
Hmm.
That's the latest and greatest version of SCCM at the moment. Okay, MECM 2211. So, first name was SMS, second SCCM, and now the new name is MECM, System Center Configuration Manager. Okay. Now, we used to have these exams 20-243, then 70-703, but they are expired now. Okay, so we don't have any exam uh, for SCCM, right? These are expired now. Now, why you should learn SCCM, I have already discussed with you guys. So let me take you to the next slide. Now, you need to make a note of it. So, SCCM has three sites in SCCM: central administration site, primary site, and secondary site, right? So, CAS is what? Central administration site. PS means primary site, and SS means secondary site. Now, central is what? It is an optional site server. The point number one, you need to make a note of it. It is an optional site server, right? This one is mandatory, okay? And this one is optional. So primary site is the mandatory one, okay? But central and secondary, these two sites are optional. Optional means they are needed only on certain condition. If you have the condition, then only you install that one, otherwise you don't install. Point number two, it needs database. Okay, it has to have a database. It stores the information or the data in its separate database. Similarly, the primary site also needs a database. Okay, and secondary also needs a database. Okay, point number three, central administration site can handle 825,000 devices. Okay, suppose if you have a very big organization wherein you have more than 200 or 300,000 devices to manage, right? Then only you install central administration side. If you have less number of devices, then you don't install central administration side. Now, primary can manage up to 175,000 client machines, and secondary can manage up to 15,000 client machines. Okay, central administration side can be installed on Windows Server, right? Windows Server 2012 or greater, like 2012, 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, 2022. Similarly, the primary side can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. Same for secondary side. It can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. Is that clear, everyone? Hmm?
Yes.
Yes.
So, central administration side needs what? Database. Primary side needs what? Database. Secondary side needs what? Database. Right? It is an optional site server. It is mandatory. It's optional. You can have 825,000 client machines. This one can have 175,000 machines, and this can have 15,000. Okay. So there are three sites in SCCM: central, primary, and secondary. Now, what is central administration site? You can make a note of it. Central administration site server is an optional site server. It's not mandatory. Second, it sits on the top of the hierarchy, right? So central will be on the top like this. Then you will have primary. Then you will have secondary. That's the architecture. Okay. Central will be on the top, right? And secondary will be at the bottom. And primary will be in the no, in the middle section. If you don't have central, then primary will be on the top. Understood? In case if you don't have central, then primary will become on the top. All good? So there are 1 minute.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So central administration site is an optional site server. It sits on the top of the hierarchy. What is the reason? Why do we need a central administration site? We need a central administration site to manage primary site. It manages primary site, and it is needed when you have more than one primary site. Suppose if you have just one single primary site, right? Suppose there is an organization where you have just one single primary site, then you don't need a central administration site at all. But if you have more than one primary site, let's say primary 1 and then primary 2, right? Then you need a CAS on the top of it. And why do we need CAS? To manage these primary site. It will manage primary site. So that is what point number 3 is. It manages, it is required when there are more than one primary site. When you have more than one primary site. Now central is gonna store the data in its database. So central administration site will have its separate database like this. And when do we need a central? When you have more than one primary. Let's say primary 1 and then primary 2. And both of them will have database, right? Primary 1 will have a separate database and primary 2 will also have a separate database. So what it will do, it is gonna replicate the data. So whatever the data primary 1 has collected, right, it is gonna pass on the data to central database. Similarly, whatever the data the primary 2 has collected, it's gonna pass on to the central database. Got it? So central, it is an optional site server. It sits on the top of the hierarchy. It manages primary site. It is needed when you have more than one primary site. It needs SQL Server database to store the data. It collects data from primary site database, right? It does not interact with client machines and secondary sites. Suppose you have secondary site here, either one or more than one primary secondary site. Let's say there are two secondary site and both of them are connected to primary. Now there will be no connection with central. Central has got nothing to do with secondary side. Okay, so central will always be talking to the primary, not secondary. Okay, and central will also not be talking to client machine. For example, you have like 50,000 client machines. So these client machines will never talk to central, right? So central has got nothing to do with these client machines. So that is what point number 7 is. Does not interact with client machine, does not interact with secondary site server, does not process client data. And that's right, because it's not talking to client machine, does not support client assignment. Clients are not assigned to central. Okay. It can support up to 825,000 client machines. Support means in one central administration site hierarchy, the maximum number of client, how many devices can be there? Let's say you have central and then primary 1, primary 2, primary 3, and then you have secondary, let's say secondary 1, secondary 2, secondary 3. So this is the hierarchy, for example. So the total number of devices in this hierarchy, total, it can go up to 825,000. That's the maximum limit. That's what it is mentioned here. Okay. And how many primary site you can have in one single secondary central administration site hierarchy? 25. So right now we have only three primary sites, primary 1, primary 2, primary 3, but it can go up to 25. Let's say P25. So 25 primary site can be there in one central administration site hierarchy. And the central administration site server can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater, either Windows Server 2012 or 12R2, right? So far clear? The central administration site server, huh? Everyone?
Yes.
So central is, you don't have to focus on central because this is like optional site server. Okay, this is needed only when you have big organization, when you have more than one primary site, then only central is needed. Otherwise, you will hardly see central administration site server in companies. Okay, now the main thing is the primary. Okay, so let's discuss about the primary now. This is primary site. Primary is what? The main site in SCCM. Without this, you cannot manage devices. You can't do anything. If you don't have primary, you don't have SCCM at all. Simple as that. So primary is playing the key functionality, key role in SCCM. So primary site, for example, the primary site is there. It's a mandatory site, sir, as you see, mandatory. Second, it manages devices on well-connected network. So primary site will be managing devices when the devices are connected on well-connected network, when the devices are on good connectivity. For example, let's take an example. You have started a company. Okay, the company name is, for example, Yahoo. Where it is located? Let's say it is located in New York. How many devices are there? 50,000 devices in New York building. So you have a building in New York wherein multiple floors are there. Okay, multiple floors. Now each floor has like 10,000 devices. 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, and 10,000. So 50,000 devices are there. Now, in order to manage these 50,000 devices, manage means what? We will have to deploy application, deploy updates, operating system, deploy policies, contents. So in order to manage these 50,000 devices, yeah, one more thing. All these devices are connected to a good network, a LAN network, right? They are on local area network connection. Now, in order to manage these 50,000 devices, who will manage? We will install one single primary site and that will manage these 50,000 devices in New York, in that building, right? Because all the machines are connected to a good network, a LAN network. So that's what point number 2 is. Got it? Point number 3, it manages secondary site. Now, what is secondary? Secondary is for branch offices. Suppose now you have started a branch office in New York. It is headquarter. For example, this is your headquarter in New York. Now there is a branch office in Mumbai. Mumbai. There are like 10,000 devices in Mumbai. Now who will manage these devices? Primary cannot manage because primary, the connection is on WAN between the primary site and these 10,000 devices, because these 10,000 devices are in Mumbai and primary site is in New York. So it's on WAN network, wide area network, not local LAN network. So the network connectivity is not good. So we can't use primary site to manage these devices. We will install secondary site. Secondary will be managing these 10,000 devices. It will be collecting data of these 10,000 devices into its database. So secondary will collect the data of these 10,000 devices and put it in the database. And primary also has a database, right? And it is going to replicate the data to primary database. Okay. So 10,000 devices. They are on um, different region. They are in Mumbai, not on the good connectivity. That's the reason we need a help of secondary site server. So what does it say? Um it requires database to store the data, right? And that's right. Sorry, point number 3, it manages secondary site. So it manages well devices on well connected network. So it is managed, primary site is managing, as you see in this case, it is managing 50,000 client machine, these 50,000, right? Plus it is managing secondary site as well. So primary site is managing secondary site as well, right? So that's the role of primary site so far. So it is a mandatory role. It manages client machine in well connected network. It manages secondary site. It requires SQL database. Primary site needs what? SQL database to store the data, right? It collects data from client machine plus secondary site database. So in this database, from where it will collect data? It will collect data from client machine. For example, there are like 50,000 client machines. So it is going to collect the data of these 50,000 devices and then pass on the information in its database. Plus it will collect the data from secondary site database. Let's say Mumbai computers. There are like 10,000 Mumbai computers. Those informations are here. It is going to pass on the information to primary site database. Okay. So it collects data from client machine plus secondary site. Point number 6, it replicates the data source to central. So primary side, whatever the data it has collected, it can pass on to secondary central database. But this case is valid only when you have central. In case if central administration site is not there, then primary side will not send data to anyone, right? But in case if um, primary side is a part of central administration side, for example, central is there, then only the replication will happen. Otherwise, it will not. So point number 6 is on the condition. In case if central is there, then only this point is valid. Otherwise, this point is not valid. Point number 7, it supports client assignment. All the machines are assigned to primary. Then point number 8, it will manage maximum 175,000 devices. And point number 9 is it can have maximum 250 secondary site. So primary site can manage how many devices? 175,000 client machines. That's the maximum number of client machines. Plus it can have how many secondary site? For example, secondary 1, secondary 2, secondary 3, secondary 4. The count will go up to maximum number of secondary site 250. Okay. So primary can have maximum 250 secondary site. That's what point number 9 is. Where can you install this one? You can install this on Windows Server 2012 or greater. Okay, clear? The primary site server, everyone? Hmm?
Yes.
Now, secondary site. Secondary, as I mentioned already, secondary is for the branch offices, computers. So secondary is an optional site. Why? Because in case if you don't have branch office, you don't have secondary site, right? For example, this is your primary site managing devices in New York. This is your headquarter, New York, 50,000 devices, right? So these 50,000 devices, who will manage? The primary side will be managing these 50,000 devices. But you have some branch offices. Let's say you have branch office Mumbai, another branch office London, another branch office Mexico. Now these have like 10,000 devices, 2,000 devices, and 5,000 devices. Who will manage these devices? These devices cannot be managed by primary because primary is they are in New York and these devices are on WAN network. So we need secondary. Let's say secondary 1, which will be secondary 2 and secondary 3. All these secondary will have database. Okay, separate database. This will be separate database. Okay, sorry. It will also have a database. So secondary will also collect data. So whatever the data, 10,000 computers information will be there in this database. 2,000 computer information will be there in its database. 5,000 computer information will be there in its database. Okay. So primary is gonna manage secondary site, right? And whatever the data secondary collected, okay, whatever the data secondary side collected, so it's gonna pass on to the primary database. So primary will also have a database. So it is gonna pass on the data to primary database. So first point, it is an optional site server. Second point, it cannot exist without a primary. If primary is not there, secondary cannot exist, right? Why do we need the secondary? It to manage devices in remote location in the branch offices, right? We will be able to manage devices in remote location. Why do we do that? Because to control network bandwidth. So manages devices in remote location to control network bandwidth. Now secondary needs database, either SQL Express or SQL Server. Okay, there are two database secondary supports. Either you can go with SQL Express or SQL Server database, any one of them. But generally we go with this one. Why? Because this is free of cost. So the secondary side database we will install database for secondary, but this one will be SQL Express, which is free of cost. You don't have to make any payment. So secondary side needs database, right? Either this one or this one. Now it collects data from client computer. Secondary side is for branch office. Let's say Mumbai. Mumbai is a branch office. Secondary has database, right? Let's say 10,000 devices. Secondary will collect the information of these 10,000 devices and pass on to the database. And finally, the data will get replicated to the primary side like this. Okay. So it collects data from client machine and it will replicate the data to the primary side database. How many devices it can have maximum? 15,000. Maximum secondary side supports 15,000 client machine. It does not interact with central administration side. So central, for example, central is on the top. Central is talking with primary. Secondary will not be talking to central. Secondary will not have any interaction with central administration side server. Last point, you can install this on Windows Server 2012 or anything which is greater than that. Is that clear, everyone?
Yes.
No question? All good? Hmm? Sufyan? So today we have learned about these three site servers. So central, right? Primary and secondary. So central administration site, primary site, and secondary site. It is an optional site server. This one is mandatory and this one is optional, right? Central needs a database, right? Primary needs database and secondary needs database. Central will have maximum 825,000 devices. Primary can have maximum 175,000 devices and secondary will have maximum 15,000 devices. You can install this on Windows Server 2012 or greater, right? Similarly, primary side can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. Windows Server 2012 or greater. Okay, clear? When do we need a secondary central administration side, guys? Hmm?
When there are more than one primary sites.
Right. In which scenario can we have more than one primary site?
It's if the users are 170, more than 175, like if they are more than 175,
More than 175,000 devices,
devices.
not
Yes.
user. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Devices. Yeah.
When do we need a secondary site?
It's a branch. It could be a branch office on the side, like doesn't has a direct it's not in one building. It could be like in another. If you want to add something to the primary site, but it's remote or could be
Hmm.
a secondary. Means like the
Yeah.
secondary word elaborates that, like it's a secondary.
Yes. So when you have devices in the remote location, when you have to manage devices in remote location, then we install secondary side, and that will help you to manage devices in remote location. Got it?
Got it.
So primary is mandatory and secondary is optional, central is optional. Now, so we'll stop right here. We'll meet tomorrow and then we will discuss about site roles in SCCM. Okay. So these are, yeah, one more thing. This is the architecture. So in this diagram, there are uh, three architectural diagrams. So the first one is for standalone primary site. Suppose you have just one single location, so you will just install one single primary site. And for example, there are like 50,000 devices in Houston. So we will install one primary site and that will manage these 50,000 devices. This is called small organization architecture. When you don't have any branch office, only one single location. When you have headquarter plus branch office both, so this is like medium size organization. 99% of time you will have to deploy a SCCM like this. So for example, you have 50,000 devices in Houston who will manage the primary site in headquarter. What about the branch offices? Let's say we will install secondary 1 here and secondary 2 here to manage devices in Seattle. For example, 2,000 devices here, 5,000 devices to manage devices in branch offices. Secondary 1 will manage the devices in Seattle. Secondary 2 will manage the devices in Boston. And both will report to the primary site. Okay, this one is very common uh, architecture. Wherever you go, you will find this kind of architecture in companies generally, primary plus secondary. The third kind of deployment is for big organization when you have more than one primary site. So primary 1, primary 2, and primary 3. When you have more than one primary site, then you need what? You need central
Yes.
on the top. All primary will report to central like this. So this is for organization where you have more than one primary site, like Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, Cognizant, right? Big organization, guys.
So what if, gosh, if what if it's the devices there are more than like 800, like
Then you need more than one central administration site.
yes, and how would be the hierarchy? Like in a, each
Then said they
individual.
no, they will have you will have to have separate hierarchy. You can't mix two central together.
Okay, so it's
Okay,
it will
that's
has
not
its
possible.
own branch, kind of tree or forest. The other one will have their own
Yes,
forest. Okay, got it.
right. So this will be like twice or thrice. But you don't have any organization which has more than 825,000 devices. I don't
I need I need to
I
check
don't know.
tomorrow. I need to check tomorrow how many devices do we have because
Hmm.
I'm at a site NYCDOE,
Hmm.
and I think we have more than 800, like more than 800, because altogether there are 1.2 or 1.3 users, million, 1.2 or 3 million users.
Okay. If you have, then you will have to go like this. You will have two separate architecture. Central one
Like including
will have its
iPads,
own tree.
student
Mm,
iPads, Chromebooks, Mac for
yes.
teachers, a desktop at
Mm,
offices, central sites. So
Hmm. Right. So all these comes under devices, right? So 825,000 is the limit. If you have more than that, if you have more than 825,000 devices, then you need more than one central administration site. So you will have oh, two different architecture. One will have its own tree, the second will have its own tree. Got it?
got it. And there should be like the Microsoft endpoint configuration. There should be two different for each, or is it going to be single configuration manager accessing both?
Different.
There's going to be two different.
Yes. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, guys, we'll meet tomorrow. Then we will discuss about some site roles, okay? Like management point, distribution point, and other things.
Okay, got it.
Okay, guys, thank you. We'll meet tomorrow. Bye now. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.